In a world where everyone was living their lives, doing what they loved, and just enjoying everyday life, a strange gate appeared out of nowhere. It was a very strange phenomenon. It appeared in every corner of the world, and it could be seen by everyone, regardless of who lived where, because it was not an isolated case of this gate. It was a frequent phenomenon that spread everywhere. But what was interesting was that these gates did not pose any threat to people, and did not affect their bodies at all. However, even though these gates did not cause any harm to people and had already become an everyday occurrence for ordinary people, scientists could not figure out the exact purpose of this unusual phenomenon. Sometime after the appearance of these strange gates around the world, due to their unknown origin and purpose, all TV channels began to report that the number of alarmed citizens was growing more and more every day. In connection with these events, in scientific circles, various researchers took this matter more seriously to investigate whether this phenomenon is accidentally connected with the ancient appearance and disappearance of monster-like living creatures. Meanwhile, while one of those strange gates hung over the city again, people continued their lives and continued to work. And then, in one of the yards where the loaders were working, a voice was heard, "Okay, everything is loaded." Carrying the last box of cargo, one of the workers said, "This is the last kitchen set." Hearing this, his friend replied, "Okay, there's still time, so we'd better get some rest." Hearing this, the third member of their team said to his friend, "Hey, did you hear that?" Hearing this from his leader, Han Yu-jin said wearily, "Yes, boss." Hearing his answer, another worker on the team spoke to the boy. "You said your name was Han Yu-jin? They told you to rest a bit before you go." He replied as he carried the luggage, "I'll just carry this." When he carried the last box of luggage and turned back to his comrades, one of them threw him a bottle of water and said, "It's heavy, isn't it? Here, drink some." He replied, "Lord, thank you." While unscrewing the cork from the bottle, he heard his boss say, "What a diligent boy! Strong hands." Hearing this, he just smiled awkwardly. After finishing the work and stopping to rest, a fellow worker asked the boy, "And why did you need to earn money with such labor? To go to university?" Hearing this, he answered shyly, "Oh yes, to pay for my junior's education." The boss replied, "You are paying for him?" Hearing this question from his boss, Han Yu-jin said, "My parents died early. Only I and my younger brother were left. That's why I left the university to work." To which he heard a tearful response. "My God, so much suffering for a young man." Hearing such disturbed voices from his superiors, Han Yu-jin took his phone out of his pocket and found a family photo of him and his brother, and held it out to his boss and said, "What suffering? Look, this is my younger brother." Taking the phone in her hands and looking at the photo of the two young boys, the boss said in amazement, "Wow, he's handsome. So neat." Hearing such words of praise, Han Yu-jin added, "Isn't it true that he's taller than me?" After handing the phone to his boss, Han Yu-jin pointed to his younger brother and began to speak enthusiastically. "Our Yu-hyun is the kindest of the kind. Since he was a little boy, there was nothing he couldn't handle." Picking up the phone again and showing the photo to his colleagues, Han Yu-jin continued to talk enthusiastically about his incredible brother, how smart he is, why he dropped out of university for him, and much more. Embarrassed by Han's stories, the manager said quietly, "Oh, okay. He's always like that. It's worth mentioning his younger brother." After finishing the story about his incredible brother and telling everything he could about him, Han Yu-jin said, smiling happily, "Today, he also has an early class." After saying that, the young man, as soon as he finished his work, just before he went home, said, "So, I will run to him right after work. We will eat meat together." After saying this, Han Yu-jin immediately changed from his work clothes to his casual clothes in a hurry to get home, and took the tram to get home as quickly as possible. Sitting in the public transport, the young man looked out the window and noticed another gate that had appeared over the city and said, "To be honest, there has been more work lately. This has its advantages." The next day, when Han Yu-jung returned to work and got into his team's work truck, he spoke heavily. "This is not the moving season, but there is no other season." Sitting in the car and going to fulfill another order, the young man said happily, "This is all for the prosperity of our bosses." The man replied, "You speak so well." "Oh, come on. It's all because of that thing over there." Hearing about the reason why people began to move to a new place of life in such large numbers, Khan was surprised. "A thing?" To which the man replied, pointing to the sky, "That's the thing that just appeared." Driving over the gate that hung in the sky above the city, the man said, "The number of people who decided to move because it made them sick has increased. I wish I knew what it really is. It must be a bad sign." Looking out of the car window, Han Yu-jin said as he gazed at the gate, "My younger brother said that it appeared on his way to school as well." The boss replied, "What if it's not something good? Maybe we should buy a house in the neighborhood." To which the man replied, "Haha, where will you get the money for that?" Contemplating this strange phenomenon that appeared out of nowhere and hovered over the city, Han Yujin, driving by, said thoughtfully, "Well, it's only good for us to have more work now that it's here." Suddenly, Han Yujin noticed that something strange was happening to the gate, changing its color and getting bigger, and he was worried. Has it always been this color? Hearing this, the boy's superiors also took notice of the portal. Looking at the gate, which had changed its color to red and began to behave strangely, Han Yujin said in surprise, "I thought it was more of a blue color before." Before he could finish, all three of them in the car felt a jolt from behind. Then the man said in surprise, "Ah, what is that?" To which the woman added, "Did someone hit us?" Finally, Han Yujin spoke up, "I'll check it out." Determined to check out what exactly happened to their car, the young man spoke up as he got out of the car before freezing in place in shock at what he saw. Suddenly, when he got out of the car, he saw a giant, scary monster in front of him, clawing at the cargo they were carrying. Realizing that things were bad, the boy wanted to run away, warning his comrades of the danger that was coming. But he only managed to say, "Both." At the very moment his sentence was cut off, the monster sitting on the luggage and looking at it intently saw the boy in front of him and decided to pounce on him. Gaining considerable speed and rushing at the boy, the monster almost reached him with one blow of its long neck. But he managed to duck, and the blow fell in the middle of the car body where his superiors were. When Han Yujin recovered from the shock and fell back to the ground, he noticed that the monster had hit the cabin with his employees and exclaimed in fright, "Ooh, what is that, bosses?" And from the cab of the car came, "Ah, honey!" Hearing the frightened cries from the car's cabin, which was being knocked to the ground by the monster, Han Yujin, watching the scene, exclaimed in fright, "A monster? What's really going on?" One by one, large flying monsters began to emerge from the portal, growing in number with each passing second, and they filled the city. Seeing the danger that was coming at them, Han Yujin exclaimed, "What is all this?" In fact, these strange gates that began to appear all over the world were gates that connected to the dungeons, another world. Through these gates, monsters from the dungeons entered the world. All the dungeons that existed in the other world, whose gates began to appear on Earth, contained monsters. And now, the uncleaned and abandoned dungeons burst, reaching their limits. Dungeon Breakthrough is the name given to the moment when the dungeon explodes and the demonic beasts that inhabited it are able to break out. And in the state when these dungeons began to explode one after another, the demonic beasts were able to break free. In our country alone, hundreds of people suffered. Many of them died. And as the monsters grew in number and people began to flee from them, only Han Yujin, who had found a stick somewhere nearby, rushed to the rescue of his leaders, shouting, "Leaders!" As Han Yujin approached the devilish monster to save his superiors, he shouted, "You vile lizard! Come out of there right now! Otherwise I'll use this!" As soon as he said this, he saw the monster slowly start to get out of the car, and someone's strong hands reached out and tore the flying monster's mouth open. The next moment, the monster and the hands were followed by the boy's boss, who finished off the monster by tearing its jaw. And then her husband got out of the car, who exclaimed in fright, "Honey!" When she heard that her husband was alive, the woman, holding the monster, said, "Are you all right? Quickly seize the moment and get out of here." Looking at his wife, the man said in amazement as he left the car, "Hands off! How did this happen?" Struggling with the monster, the woman exclaimed, "I don't know either. It's just a power by itself." And at that time, there appeared people who awakened abilities in the face of monsters. Those who were able to awaken their power when monsters attacked them became known as monster hunters. They were assigned to defend the dungeons. Hunter quickly became one of the most sought-after professions in the world. At the same time that the dungeons began to explode and devilish creatures began to emerge from them, Han Yujin's brother also gained the ability to see them appear in different people. When a lot of ordinary people who, like Han Yu-hyun, were also on the bus to school and were attacked by monsters, ran for their lives, but fell to the ground due to clumsiness. One of them, who was Han Yujin's brother, decided that he could not simply run away from the danger, and also received his ability to resist monsters. Seeing the boy's ability, the other students exclaimed in surprise, "What is this?" Looking at one of his comrades, who was holding back the invasion after receiving his power, one of the crowd said in amazement, black flames like pitch," having repelled the entire invasion of the monsters that escaped from the dungeons, which burst from overcrowding. Each of the city's inhabitants began to look for their relatives. Wandering around the city, Han Yu-hyun saw his wounded brother lying unconscious. Running to him and picking him up, he said sadly, "Damn fool." A lot of time has passed since the first invasion of the monsters that escaped from the dungeons, and now, 8 years later, the present day, the Republic of Korea, Seoul. While gathering all the people who have some kind of superpowers, one of the hunters, being in a corporation, demonstrated her strength. Having created some interesting spectacle in her hand, she said, "See?" Watching the girl demonstrate her powers, the reporter said to her in confusion, "No, nothing. Is there something there?" The hunter girl replied, "This is the window of state. Only I can see it." Considering her ability, which she demonstrated for the journalist's report, the hunter girl continued her story with joy. At first I thought, have I really fallen into some kind of game? Looking at the description of her ability, which read, "Make our nature greener and greener, E. Skill to grow trees in a specific area." She said, "In this status, window is a list of skills I can use." As she talked about her skills, she decided to demonstrate them in a practical way, and by slamming her hands on the floor, she immediately grew many trees around her and said, "About like this." After applying the skill, the reporter and her crew started filming the whole thing to capture the moment and show everyone what kind of hunters this world is. After photographing the skill of instantly growing trees, the reporter exclaimed, "Unbelievable! Did you save people with this skill?" While recording the incredible report, the journalist told the story of how Miss Yumi got her ability by speaking. 8 years ago, during the dungeon strike, Miss Yumi was looking for a job because she lived in an environment that was full of mold and moss. Continuing her story to the live TV camera, the girl continued, "Having awakened the skill of the wooden vine," as she continued to hear such words of praise being spoken to her, Miss Yumi just listened in silence. She recently saved citizens from a falling building. Hearing this, Yumi said, "Heh, heh, I was in a hurry and didn't notice something." After the reporter told the story of how Miss Yumi became a huntress, she added, "Miss Yumi, who was looking for a job, then chose the profession of a hunter, and she is engaged in clearing dungeons as part of a small guild." When asking the captain of this guild, the correspondent received the following answer from him. "The additional items we get in dungeons cost a gray. It's a bit dangerous, but it's better than any other job, especially dungeons above A class. Well, you can consider them a gold mine." The head of the guild spoke about what could be found there. "That's right. A new material from the dungeons that didn't exist in our world. Magic stones. Their value ranges from a few hundred to several billion. Thanks to this, hunters with good skills are sitting on immensely large piles of money." Recalling the strongest hunters that exist in their world, the guild leader added, "And if they are S-class hunters who can clear high-level dungeons by themselves, then there is nothing to talk about." Mentioning one prominent hunter who is known to many people, he said, "The famous hunter Han Yu-hyun is especially famous in our country. Was he still a high school student when he awakened?" Recalling his life story, the guild head said, "He lost his parents at a very early age and grew up in poverty, and after his awakening, he founded the Abyss Guild and is the youngest guild leader." Continuing to talk about the youngest guild leader and the most outstanding warrior, the guild leader added, "He is currently 25 years old, and they say his wealth is unimaginable." Continuing her report, the journalist approached Yumi and asked her, "And what about you, Huntress Yumi? Have you become rich too?" To which she replied embarrassedly, "What kind of rich person am I? I am E-class, so it is impossible." Having embarrassingly mentioned her rank as a hunter, Miss Yumi, who was being interviewed, said dreamily, "But if I keep working, I'll make a little bit of money, right? It would be nice to save money for my younger sister's education." This recorded interview was Miss Yumi's last. She was killed during the clearing of the dungeon. The huntress is the death of the heroine of the report. After Miss Yumi and her guild went on another sweep, this morning she was taken to the hospital after being wounded. Unfortunately, she was unable to recover and died. Watching a TV report about the death of one of the hunters, Han Yujin, drinking alcohol, listened to the news. How attractive the work of a hunter is because of the high earnings. How dangerous it is, and the darker side of the coin. The next day, when the news of the huntress's death spread around the world, a new gate leading to the dungeon appeared somewhere in the city. Watching the gate, and wondering what rank this dungeon could be, one of the soldiers spoke quietly to his group leader. "Chief." Cleaning his weapon before leaving and preparing to open the gate, the soldier sitting next to his leader repeated himself. "Huh? Are you listening?" "Chief." Noticing one disgruntled soldier who seemed irritated by something, the team leader spoke to him. "What is wrong with you?" He replied, "What's wrong with me? What else could be wrong when you bring a person like that into the unit?" As he said this, the disgruntled soldier pointed to a young man sitting next to him, holding crutches. It was Han Yu-jin, F-class. His nickname was the Tutor. Pointing to him, the soldier said in displeasure, "There he is. Isn't that Han Yu-jin, F-class?" Hearing this from the disgruntled soldier, Han Yu-jin replied, "Ah, so I'm famous? Haha, you should be more lenient with me. I also live by clearing dungeons." And he thought, "I'm going to put a lot of buffs on this guy." To which he replied arrogantly, "No need. Isn't that the problem now?" Grabbing his warrior by the shoulder, the squad leader said to his comrade, "Don't behave like that. Few hunters would accept such a small reward." To which he replied, "Oh, of course. He will even agree to such conditions. Who brought this cave horse here?" As Han Yujin sat there listening to this, he remembered everything that had been said about him. A magnet for problems, a freak of nature, surviving by himself so many times when the rest of the squad died, a bad sign, a parasite that consumes other people's lives. Listening to all the insults in his direction, Han Yujin heard something that he should never say to anyone. Things are so bad that even his incomparable younger brother has abandoned him. Searching his phone for an article about Han Yuheng, the outraged warrior added, "Oh, he didn't even visit his brother in the hospital once when his leg was ground to dust, did he?" Hearing this, his comrade spoke to him. "Hey, stop talking about his younger brother." Continuing to surf the internet and search for information about Han Yu-hyun being in the hospital, the indignant man added, "No, just look at this article. How vile is he, even as a younger brother?" Just as he was about to speak, he was interrupted. Han Yu-jin got up from his seat, grabbed the outraged warrior by the collar and pulled him to him, speaking angrily. "Shut up already!" Looking menacingly into the eyes of his criminal, Han Yu-jin, holding his collar, spoke angrily to him. "This has nothing to do with you or anyone else." Raising his hands up and calming Han Yu-jin, who was furiously attacking him, the outraged warrior said, "Haha, you're angry, huh?" And the next moment, taking the initiative, the outraged warrior, demonstrating his strength, kicked Han Yu-jin in the body and threw him away, saying, "Where did you lose all your fear to attack like this?" After the kick knocked him to the ground, the outraged warrior grabbed him by the collar and raised him to eye level. Listening to him cough and gasp for air, he said, "You bastard who ate Belina. Hey, look here. Do you feel the difference in strength? Huh?" Holding the poor guy by the collar, who was writhing in pain, the outraged warrior added, "How dare an F-class have the courage to provoke a D-class?" Showing the difference in strength between the two, the outraged warrior let go of Han Yu-jin and walked away, saying finally, "If it's so offensive, complain to your incredible brother." To which his friend added, "So is he, God. He behaves like that when it comes to his little brother." Having been injured in a fight because he responded to the provocations of a warrior who was stronger than him, Han Yu-jin, sitting on the ground, coughed up the unequal battle, saying, "Ah, damn." But after a short period of time, he saw a leader in front of him who wanted to heal him. Noticing that he was trying to help him in confusion, Han Yu-jin spoke to him. "Leader," he replied. "My God, we haven't even entered the dungeon yet." Using his power, the chief temporarily healed Han Yu-jin and added, "I strengthened the skeleton. I can't heal your leg, but you'll be able to move it easily for a few hours. Don't take his words too seriously. It doesn't make sense." Looking at his injured leg, which had just been healed, albeit temporarily, by the group leader, Han Yu-jin heard him say the following words. "You're an F-class. You'll have to rely on someone, like it or not, so be patient, M." Hearing these words of encouragement from his leader, who had treated him quite well, Han Yu-jin, no longer feeling pain in his knee, smiled happily at him, beaming with happiness. When the squad leader offered his hand to help him up, the boy grabbed it and said, "Of course. As an F-class, I am grateful that you are taking me with you." To which the leader replied happily, "Oh, great then," clasping his hands tightly to get up from the ground. Han Yu-jin stood up and held his commander's strong uku and spoke to him. "Chief, you yourself are working so hard to reconcile us." After saying these words of gratitude, Han Yu-jin added, "Be brave. I will always be grateful to you." Hearing Han Yu-jin say this, the chairman said to him in embarrassment, "Oh, thank you. As expected, Yu-jin is the only one who notices." Seeing that everything had gone according to his plan, the boy thought, "Gotcha." Leaning on his crutches, Han Yu-jin watched the scene. The head of the squad ran up to the outraged warrior and slapped him on the back of the head, exclaiming, "Bastard! Stop bothering our Yu-jin. Our Yu-jin is very fast, and he knows dungeons and monsters firsthand." Surprised by his boss's behavior, the bully exclaimed, "Ah, why are you doing this all of a sudden?" Standing behind and listening to these correctional workers in his squad, Han Yu-jin used his skill to speak softly, checking the subject's upbringing. After applying these characteristics, he saw an information window appear above the leader, which read, "Guild leader Imseok has been added to the nurturing objects." It also said next to the bully, "Cave horse, bad luck. A parasite that consumes other people's lives." After completing his operation to add a new pet, Han Yu-jin heard, "Yes, let's go in. Han Yu-jin, you hurry up too." As he approached the dungeon gate, he replied, "Yes, I'm coming." When all the members of the guild headed for the dungeon gate, they moved into it. Once inside, they saw the ancient ruins that covered the overgrowth. Before they could fully explore the dungeon, they heard a strange roar coming from the dungeon, and soon after, they saw two bat monsters heading towards them. Realizing that danger awaits them at every turn, they all began to defend themselves against the enemy's attack. Having repelled the attack, it was also time to join the battle to clear the way for further movement across the terrain. After defeating the enemies and advancing further, the group found themselves in the middle of a strange forest. And then the leader spoke to everyone. "Do not let your guard down. We do not know where the monster will come from." Hearing this, one of the warriors in the group shouted out confidently, "Hey, we've been here so many times before. Who is so incredible that he can climb out in a D-class dungeon?" As he went further and further into the dungeon, destroying monsters along the way, the chairman stopped at another monster he had killed and said, "Haha, God." During the dungeon strike, we were shaking at the sight of the dead creatures. After searching the next monster they had killed, the guild leader took out a crystal and said in amazement, "I did not expect that we would earn so much." His comrade replied, "Oh, it's big. With this size, even a D-class magic stone will cost several hundred." When he finished examining his trophy, the outraged warrior who had fought Han Yu-jin noticed that he was using a pickaxe to extract crystals and called out to him, "Hey, F-class, are you mining hard over there? Do you know that 80% of what you get will go to the commission?" Hearing this, Han Yu-jin, who had been mining small crystals from the rock, turned his head toward the bully and said in disappointment, "Eh? But there's nothing more serious than this waste." Leaving Han Yu-jin, the squad marched on, and the bully said to him in closing, "The monster magic stones are our destiny. If you don't want to starve to death, dig out what's there." Hearing this, Han Yu-jin only sighed heavily, saying, "Oh." Just as he was about to begin his work, he was called out again, saying, "If you are caught hiding anything, you will be stripped naked and hung on a post of shame." As the troop marched on, Han Yu-jin resumed his work when he suddenly spoke angrily. "Damn kids. They're using me as cheap labor. I'm no different than Cinderella, huh?" Cinderella. Thinking of Cinderella, Han Yu-jin suddenly stopped working and said sadly, "Young orphan. I lost my parents. Even my younger brother turned his back on me." Recalling everything that happened to him after the monsters from the dungeons first broke out into their world, Han Yu-jin said, after he woke up, he left the house. And after Han Yu-hyun decided to leave the house after waking up, he wouldn't even listen to his older brother when he asked him to stay, arguing that it was dangerous. While Han Yu-jin went to the army to complete his military training, his younger brother gathered hunters and created the Abyss Guild, slowly developing and becoming stronger and stronger every day. And the Abyss was recognized as the strongest guild in the country. The brother became somehow unattainable. When he became so strong, and together with strong hunters, he raised his guild to the top, making it recognizable everywhere. Then Han Yu-jin. Thinking back to that time, the time when it all happened, and all because he couldn't just awaken and tap into his power. If only he had awakened then. In order to achieve his goal, Han Yu-jin spent all of his money after he was fired from his job and found a broker who promised to awaken him. And he was flattered by the promise of taking care of him since he was already an S-class brother. He also did many bad things in order to awaken, and now, though he awoke late, he is only F-class, but he's the younger brother of an S-class. While discussing Han Yu-jin, one of the Abyssal Guild members said, "He was begging to be accepted into the Abyss? The F-class should have at least some conscience. You called yourself the older brother of the head of the Abyss. We believed you, supported you. You have to make amends." After all these events, Han Yu-jin's name became very famous in the press, and he was often quoted, and he also fell into a debt pit. As Han Yu-jin was kneeling in his misery, his younger brother saw him passing by and spoke to him. "Are you making a scene again?" Looking at his older brother, the younger one said to him, "How long do you plan to make your younger brother clean up after you?" F-class hunter Han Yu-jin. Standing over him, looking down on him, Han Yu-hyun spoke to him. "The nickname you received when you woke up was Nurturer. After all, you raised an S-class. Aren't you ashamed of that nickname?" After saying this, Han Yu-hyun leaned over to his elder brother, who had been so severely punished by fate, and said to him in a disdainful voice, "Not so much as a tutor. Right now you're just shackling me hand and foot." After this incident, Han Yu-jin, walking through the dungeons, was unable to use his leg anymore because of the numerous wounds he received there, and his younger brother. Hearing his elder brother's request, he angrily responded by ordering him out. "Hiller's help? Do you have any idea how this works?" As Han Yu-hyun watched his brother being led out of the office, he said to his elder brother, "Everything has worked out very well. You won't be getting into trouble in the dungeons anymore." After saying this, the younger brother looked at his elder Han Yu-jin with an angry look and said to him one last time, "Please live quietly. Don't bind your younger brother's hands and feet anymore." Recalling all the events that had happened to him and all that he had experienced and gone through, Han Yu-jin said with a heavy sigh, "Yes, I deserve to be abandoned." Thinking about how people talked about him, Han Yu-jin continued to mine the crystals and thought, the helpless older brother of an incredible S-class hunter, a parasite trying to take advantage of him. All this is what ordinary people say about me as soon as they hear my name. This is not a delusion. It is all true. Yes, it is true. Continuing to complain about himself while mining crystals, the boy continued, and the fact that I, F-class, still survive in dungeons, where people die all the time, only because of that skill that takes advantage of others. Leaving his pickaxe behind and deep in thought, Han Yu-jin wandered through the dungeon, stopped by the lake, and looking at his reflection said, the nickname is Nurturer. Nurturer was the ability Han Yu-jin had when he awakened his ability, and it allowed him to have some kind of influence on the people around him. Everyone around him, starting with his closest relatives, someone as close as his own brother, whom he had cared for since childhood, and personally cared for him and raised him. He could also influence the other people around him, those with whom he simply made an acquaintance and they became friends, if it was people with whom he was on friendly terms. He used a code word that sounded like this: man up, they became his pupils. But all that this effect did for those people who became his pupils was to improve their development slightly. This is the basic skill of a tutor, but picking up the pickaxe again and continuing to extract crystals from the rock, Han Yu-jin said, how can one survive with something like this on a day like this, even if the F-class is the most helpful? As he said this, the boy was once again swallowed up in memories that included the following: the cave horse, the parasite that survived alone again, even when all the other team members were dying. Recalling all those terrible moments of the deaths of his comrades who had once teamed up with him, Han Yu-jin continued, I didn't survive because I was lucky, and I didn't survive because I was in the rear. In fact, the caregiver has another hidden skill. And it was this skill that saved the boy every time in crisis situations. It is thanks to her that I am still alive, not paying attention to everyone else. At some point, under certain circumstances, the effect of the title, Educator, manifests itself. An additional skill, the last retribution, is launched. As Han Yu-jin continued to extract crystals from the rock, he heard the notification of his leader's temporary skill acquisition and said in alarm, what? Now? The skills and abilities of the 2T are transferred at double the amount. Holding the pickaxe in his hands, Han Yu-jin noticed that the power that the guild leader he had left with had now appeared in his hands. Looking at his hands, he said in fright, the power is running away from me. When he looked at the power that began to fill him, he saw that it was a very familiar power that had already been used on him. It was the power of his superior. Throwing the pickaxe out of his hands and deciding to move on in the same direction as the rest of his comrades, Han Yu-jin said in a worried voice, no, this is completely absurd. Grabbing his crutches to move on, he walked in the direction the rest of his teammates had gone. Panicked, how is this even possible in a D-class dungeon? The abilities and skills of the pet that the boy had improved with his skill. For a certain period of time, they are transferred to him, but under certain conditions. If the pet's speed is 100, it can run at 200. If he's strong, Han Yu-jin will be twice as strong. Thanks to this skill, he always survived. As Han Yu-jin approached the place where his friends were headed, he continued, but this is an incredibly stupid skill, because the condition for its activation is, thinking of all his comrades and his family, he said, to be more precise, not for its activation, but the very fact of activating this skill means that, realizing exactly what had happened, Han Yu-jin exclaimed in fear, unable to believe what had happened. This can't be possible, boss. When he arrived at the place where the boss and the rest of his teammates had gone, he saw a horrifying sight, a lake of blood stretching to his feet. Continuing to walk along the trail of blood that led him to the battlefield where everything that had activated his ability had taken place, he continued, target dead. Seeing the sea of blood, Han Yu-jin, who was following in his direction, looked up and saw the dead body of his commander in front of him, and said in fright, and commander. While looking at the dead body of his leader, Han Yu-jin heard someone screaming in the distance and saw something that shocked him. It was coming from the direction of, don't! Han Yu-jin turned his head to the side and saw the king of poison and curse dragons, Raukatas, devouring the warrior who had mocked him. While in the dragon's mouth, the warrior, who had already lost his arm and was mortally wounded, desperately exclaimed, it is impossible! Why is there a D-class dungeon? That bastard! It's all because of his stupid omens, because he's connected to him. As Han Yu-jin watched the dragon devour the warrior, who was screaming in pain and calling for help, he could only stare at it with a frightened look, but he could not resist such an enemy. Seeing such a formidable opponent in such a low-ranking dungeon, Han Yu-jin said in surprise, King of the poison dragons and the curse of the Raukadas. Observing such a powerful opponent, Han Yu-jin thought, So far, no one has been able to defeat him. A first-class dragon bloodline that means elimination is impossible. Seeing that all of his comrades had already died at the hands of this powerful beast, the young man hid from the dragon and thought in fright, "Why is such a monster here?" Peeking out from his hiding place to run back to the dungeon exit, Han Yu-jin saw how huge the monster was and said in fright, "Absurd." When the dragon noticed him, it immediately began to growl loudly at the enemy, who, like all the others, had invaded his domain. And the boy still couldn't believe it, thinking, "This is a D-class dungeon." While running away from this incredibly strong monster, Han Yu-jin was frightened and thinking about something that he couldn't understand. Why is a first-class Rakitas-type dragon race here? As Han Yu-jin ran away from the monster, he felt his boss's skills start to work, and his legs became stronger, with more strength in them, and he could move much faster. As he managed to slip back into the rock from which he had come, Han spoke. "Master's skill is D-class skeleton strengthening. Now I have a double effect." After using his superior skill, the boy saw an exit near him and said, "I'll use this speed to hide where he can't get in. Escape at all costs." Just as Han Yu-jin reached his hiding place, finding a small hope of escaping his death, the dragon destroyed the building and his hopes with a single flick of its tail. Standing on the edge of the abyss, Han Yu-jin, who had already prepared himself for the fact that he had nowhere to run and would not be able to with his legs like that, was already preparing for his demise. Watching the actions of the enemy dragon, the young man noticed that one of the heads of the three-headed monster was approaching him to strike. Deciding to fight to the end if he could not escape, he raised one of his crutches in front of him and thought, "Here he comes. If I block it with my arms." The boy's attempt to block the monster's punch failed. With such a strong opponent, it was obvious. After the blow, Han Yu-jin flew back a considerable distance. Looking up and seeing that he was injured and already bleeding, the boy coughed heavily and thought, "I am definitely no match for him." Looking at the enemy he had to confront, the young man, who had lost hope of escaping, thought, "Even with the double strength of the skill of the boss." But suddenly, the boy was invaded by the dying memories of his boss, who tried to save his comrades from this monster by healing their wounds. But realizing that they were too serious, that even with a healing potion, it did not help. While healing his wounded comrade, the chief heard his other comrade, who had decided to protect them with his body, shout out, "First, hide in the corner, chief." In an attempt to draw the monster's attention to himself so that they could retreat and heal, one of the boss's team called out to him with his wounded comrade, "I will buy you time anyway." Seeing these dying memories, Han Yu-jin, lying on the ground, watching the inevitable, resigned himself to his fate and thought, "Damn, I can't escape with these legs." He looked up and saw the dragon in front of him, which was about to approach him. He looked into its red eyes and thought, "After all, that's how I am." As soon as the dragon approached the boy, who was not even moving, it immediately opened its mouth without a second's hesitation and wanted to eat him. Han Yu-jin, already seeing his death, said, "I will die like this." But at the last moment before the monster's teeth were about to reach him, his younger brother grabbed him and saved him from death. When his brother laid him down on the ground, Han Yu-jin said to him in a surprised voice, "Han Yu-hyun, how are you?" Hearing these words from his brother, the younger man looked back at the older man and said, "Go back." Hearing these words from his younger brother, the wounded Han Yu-jin, who realized what was about to happen, said in alarm, "What? Wait, even you with a three-headed opponent." While the older brother was trying to persuade the younger brother to retreat and not to fight this enemy because his strength was too powerful, the younger brother stood firm and prepared to fight the enemy. Seeing that the enemy was close, almost at the right distance to attack, Han Yu-jin took out his weapon from its sheath and said, "Skill activation." As soon as he said this, a blue energy sphere immediately appeared in his hand, and blue willow leaves flew out from it, covering his entire body. After activating this skill, Han Yu-hyun immediately rushed at his enemy to prevent him from striking first. He jumped up and used a glare to blind the enemy. Gathering the full flow of his power, Han Yu-hang slowly directed it directly to his sword to make his attack powerful enough to break through the monster's defense. And the next moment, as soon as his younger brother's strength was gathered, he immediately launched his attack at the enemy. Watching his brother's battle, the elder brother on the ground spoke in astonishment as he followed his younger brother Han Yu-hang's movements. "That's pretty fast." Watching his brother fight so skillfully against such a powerful opponent, the elder brother continued, "This is an S-class battle." While the younger one was trying to pierce the defense of one dragon head by aiming at its head, he noticed that the other head was already preparing to launch a counterattack. As soon as Han Yu-hang noticed this, he immediately jumped out of the way of the deadly poison attack that the first head of the three-headed dragon had launched. As he dodged the attack, he noticed that the stream of venom flew toward his brother and called out, "Beware! This is a deadly poison that cannot be saved by a healing potion. If you touch it, you will be cursed." Seeing that the first stream of venom had passed by, the dragon decided to attack again, but this time at a stationary target. Noticing that his brother was in danger, Han Yu-hei activated the giant shield ability. After activating this ability, he rushed to his brother to protect him from the terrible stream of poison that the monster wanted to cover him with. Seeing such a risky maneuver to protect his brother, Han Yu-jin, who was terrified by what was happening, said, "Yu-hyun!" Having repelled such a dangerous attack by a powerful enemy, Han Yu-hyun was already preparing to attack the enemy, who, after such a powerful attack, opened up for a strike, but alas misfortune. After the royal dragon's attack was repelled, the younger brother noticed that his sword had melted from the poison. Seeing this, the elder exclaimed, "The sword blade." As he said this, he saw his brother rush back into the battle, despite the fact that his weapon was damaged. Watching the battle, Han Yu-jin thought, "Is this really how he behaves when protecting me? Is that why he can't fight freely?" As Han Yu-jin watched his brother fight cautiously, not trying to counterattack too often, but thinking through each attack so that the King Dragon's attack would not accidentally hit his injured brother, he thought, "It's all because of me?" Noticing that his brother had come within a short distance of him, the elder spoke to the younger, "Yu-hyung?" But the latter did not even want to listen, and interrupted him, exclaiming, "Why did you go to the dungeon again? Wasn't even the crushed leg enough to bring you to your senses?" Thinking of all those who had died in this dungeon this time, Han Yu-heng said to his older brother, "You're climbing in without knowing your place. And what's the result? How long do you plan to make me clean up after you?" Turning to face his elder brother, Han Yu-hyun shouted desperately at him, seeing that he was watching him closely. "How many times have I said, 'Stay out of the way and live quietly'?" Hearing these words from his younger brother, who was fighting such an incredibly formidable opponent, Han Yu-jin spoke to him. "Did you come here just to tell me this?" When he heard the elder's reproach that he had come to the dungeon for that very reason, he replied, "Don't wag your tongue. Go to the corner now." And he heard, "I was wondering why you came." Han Yu-jin continued his speech and exclaimed, "Are you so afraid of being bound by my hands and feet again?" But he had other thoughts in his head. What did I expect? Did I think he came to save me because I was his older brother? No, that's impossible. I really don't know my place. As Han Yu-jin watched this giant dragon rushing toward his younger brother, he called out to his younger brother, "You're tired of it, aren't you?" Using his strength, Han Yu-jin began to summon his sword and shouted, "I'm tired of a person who doesn't know his place acting like an older brother and meddling, right?" Continuing to carry out his plan for self-destruction, Han Yu-jin continued, "Why did you even come here? You can do it so much easier." He replied, "I told you to back off." Seeing that his older brother, grabbing his sword, was recklessly rushing toward an enemy who was 1,000 times his strength, he exclaimed in alarm, "What are you doing?" As soon as the elder brother had made all the preparations to put his plan into action, he rushed at the dragon, and the next moment, he drove his sword into its body, trying to pierce its defense. Seeing such reckless actions of his elder brother, who was in such a terrible state, not only not saving his life, but on the contrary, wanted to lose it as soon as possible, he exclaimed in surprise, "What are you doing?" Having drawn the attention of the first-ranked royal dragon to himself, Han Yu-jin released the weapon from his hands and spoke in a relaxed manner, ready to accept his fate. "Isn't this how it's going to end?" Dropping the sword from his hands, the older brother spoke in a sad voice to his younger brother. "You save me, and then I will become your chains again. Just leave me here to die, that's all." Having gathered the courage to finally say it, Han Yu-jin's older brother said with complete confidence in his eyes, "There is no need to organize a funeral for someone who dies in the danja." As Han Yu-jin said this, he remembered the moment when the younger brother turned away from him and walked away with his comrades, and he stood behind him, watching in confusion, and said, "I'm tired. Since when?" Seeing that the first-ranked royal dragon was almost upon him with its huge mouth, he finally said, "What's wrong with you? Everyone in the abyss will be happy as well, so you don't have to worry about me anymore." Han Yu-jin gritted his teeth tightly and closed his eyes to make his death less scary, but not his younger brother, Han Yu-hyun. Realizing that his brother was in danger, he could not accept this development and the end of his brother's life, and immediately rushed to his aid to save him from death. A moment later, Han Yu-jin opened his eyes and saw his wounded brother, who had 2 large wounds on his back and a curse on him. Seeing such a terrible picture in front of him, Han Yu-jin again remembered his past, namely the moment when their parents died. We were brothers who had no one else, standing in front of the altar with their parents' photos and flowers, along with a candle for the repose of their souls. He recalled the words that were spoken at the time, and they hurt him, especially after his parents' deaths. "Brother, are you okay?" Looking at his younger brother, and holding his hand to give him hope that he was not alone in this world and had someone to rely on, Han Yu-jin spoke to his younger brother. "It's okay, Yu-hyun." Holding his hand, Han Yu-jin thought that in the whole world, the 2 of them were the only ones who had each other. And then he said to his younger brother, "You're hungry, aren't you? Shall I make you something to eat? Looking at the wounded body of his younger brother who had protected him and was now bleeding, Han Yu-jin said to him in a worried voice, "Brother, are you okay? What is it, Han Yu-heng?" Seeing that his brother was mortally wounded, unable to fight anymore, and that his life would soon be cut short by the curse that had been placed on him, the elder spoke to him. "Why are you—" Gathering the last of his remaining strength, the younger brother spoke to Han Yu-jin, breathing heavily and bleeding. "Aha! Now listen carefully, brother." Looking into his eyes, Han Yu-hyun informed his elder of important information, saying, "Ryuchitas. He falls asleep every 5 hours. If you hide for another hour, he will fall asleep." Looking toward the enemy, Han Yu-hyun, giving instructions to his older brother, continued with a heaviness in his voice, "Then take this moment to get out." Hearing these words, Han Yu-jin said in alarm, "No, no, no." Once again, Han Yu-jin thought back to the moment when he was in the hospital. Even when his bones were shattered into small pieces, he never visited me in the hospital. Also, when he asked him more than once to help him with various requests, he just pushed me away with a cold look. But he always said the same thing. Every time the younger one saw the older one, he told him to keep his head down and live quietly. Looking at his half-dead brother, who had only minutes to live, Han Yu-jin thought, "But why are you smiling here and now?" And the latter, in his last moments, handed his brother a pendant and said, "Here, take it." As Han Yu-jin handed the artifact to his older brother, he heard him speak to him, handing him the stone. "This is the gate stone. With it, you can get out." Holding his injured brother in his arms, Han Yu-jin did not know how to behave, and spoke to his brother in a worried voice. "This is for you!" "No, this wound is more important now." As soon as he said this, his brother immediately became quiet and lowered his arms, and 2 sharp claws could be seen from his back. Seeing that it was too late to do anything, Han Yu-jin said, "There's no point." Raising his head and looking at his elder brother with a guilty look, the younger one spoke to him. "The gate stone. I will not be able to use it." Feeling that his brother was no longer moving, collapsed on top of him, Han Yu-jin anxiously began to call out to his younger brother, repeating over and over again, "Hey, Han Yu-hyun." But it was too late and everything was clear. Han Yu-jin's skill had worked, and it was reported. The effect of the title, Tutor, is manifesting. The duration of the additional skill, Final Retribution, is 1 hour. As Han Yu-jin felt the incredible power overwhelming his body, he couldn't help but cry as he heard the system alert. The skills and abilities of the deceased Han Yu-heng. The first-ranked royal dragon saw what was happening near him and where the light was coming from, and ran toward Ha Yu-jin. And the system alert informed him, transmitting with double the power. Having received his younger brother's skills, Han Yu-jin took him in his arms and carried his younger brother's body to a safe place so that he could find it later and bury it with honor. And again, the same picture repeated itself as at the beginning, when the older brother held the dead body of his younger brother in his arms, and shedding tears over it, said, "Damn fool." After his brother died, Han Yu-jin once again received the strength of his mentee, who had said goodbye to his life in double the amount. Hugging him tightly, Han Yu-jin said, "The power is flowing into me." As soon as the process of acquiring the power of his fallen student was complete, Han Yu-jin, furious at his enemy for the loss, formed a spear in his hand that he had created from the power he had received. Hugging his brother, Han Yu-jin, remembering everything that had happened to him, how he had been treated, and what the reason was, said angrily as he prepared to fight, "You will do this to me to the very end." While he was saying goodbye to his dead brother and recovering from the loss, the dragon was not going to wait for him to gain enough strength and went straight for Han Yu-jin. But as soon as the dragon approached the boys, Han Yu-jin was already standing over his brother's dead body. And as soon as he saw the right moment to attack, he immediately struck the approaching monster. Analyzing the way he fought the monster, Han Yu-jin, after striking the enemy, said, irritated with himself, "Slowly. I have twice the strength of my incredible brother." Although he was moving slowly, as for someone who had received double the strength of an incredibly powerful warrior who had died, Han Yu-jin managed to cut off one of the Dragon King's heads. While receiving his brother's power and fighting the enemy, Han Yu-jin also began to receive the memories of the deceased Han Yu-hyun. Thinking back to the moment when Han Yu-jin first awakened, his younger brother looked at the file and thought, "My older brother has awakened in the F class." Seeing that his brother was so weak, Han Yu-hyun spoke to his ward, who was standing next to him and whom he could trust. "That's why he shouldn't mess with me." Pushing his brother further and further away, even trying to avoid him, Han Yu-hyun continued, "I need to keep him as far away as possible, even farther away than I am now. If my brother becomes my weak point, they will definitely target him." Reviewing all of his brother's memories in his head from the time he avoided his older brother, he continued to think, "Even if I have to make the relationship even worse, Reviewing all the memories that appeared in his mind, Han Yu-jin continued to fight the enemy more and more fiercely with each passing second, realizing that his younger brother was always remembering him. As Han Yu-jin charged at the first-ranked royal dragon, he managed to strike it once, but it didn't do enough damage and he had to retreat to regroup. While he continued to fight and dodged another attack, another memory reappeared in his mind, in which the following happened. After putting the letters with the information he had obtained on some people, Han Yu-hyun said to his secretary, "Keep watching him. If anything happens, report back. If he becomes a hunter, he won't be able to be properly protected by the law." It was at that very moment that Han Yu-jin was in the hospital with broken bones in one of his legs. Unable to visit him, Han Yu-hyun said, "Damn it! Why couldn't I have stopped him before this happened?" Looking over the reports and information about the people who had injured his younger brother, Han Yu-hyun threw the papers off his desk and shouted in anger, "Deal with all these bastards! The bastards who did this to his leg!" After saying this and ordering the execution of all those who were involved in the act of maiming his brother, Han Yu-hyun's subjects negotiated, and one of them said, "Tell them that it is forbidden to hurt him." Giving orders to his subjects, Han Yu-hyun said to one of them, "Send them out the door. Give them only material assistance. Make it look like I was forced to do this only because we are brothers. It's better that way than for him to go to the dungeon." Having given such a cruel order to his subject, Han Yu-hyun, alone in his office, began to reproach himself for having to do this to his own brother, repeating it over and over again. "I'm sorry, brother. I'm sorry." Sitting on the floor, huddled in a corner, the mighty warrior, who knew no fear, was so embarrassed by the situation that he was curled up in a ball and said guiltily, "Please, brother, do not go into the dungeon." After remembering everything and learning the truth about why he had been treated this way, Han Yu-jin had already defeated the monster while he was going through all the memories in his head, and was standing on the dead dragon while it was raining heavily. Standing on top of the defeated monster, Han Yu-jin could shed tears without restraint, because the rain would not show his crying face. Hanging his head after all the truth he had learned, Han Yu-jin said guiltily, "Ha ha! Who does he think he is? He didn't say a single word, asshole." As Han Yu-jin stuck his spear into the ground and leaned on it, tired and shocked by what he had learned, he said with a wistful voice, "What should I do now? I never expected this. I really broke you by chaining your hands and feet." As Han Yu-jin approached his brother's body, which he carried to safety, he said sadly, "The time for the final retribution will soon expire, which means that when the time runs out, I will also die from the poison of Ryuchita's internal substances." While waiting for his death, Han Yu-jin, who was sitting next to his brother, thought about his life and said, "Yes, what else would I do if I survived? I would just keep going." But suddenly he saw a gift icon in front of him and a notification that read, "An impossible achievement, you have slain a dragon." Getting to his feet, Han Yu-jin saw what was written after this achievement. The legendary title of Dragon Slayer is granted. As a reward, 10 gate stones, 5 first-class purchase substances, a great red dragon sword, and, after telling us about all the rewards that belong to the winner of the Dragon King, the most interesting thing was left for last. It was a wishing stone that could fulfill any wish. Looking at the rewards he had received, Han Yu-jin was most interested in the wishing stone that could grant a dream. As he approached it and began to examine it, he said in astonishment, "Any wish?" Hearing that it could fulfill any wish, Han Yu-jin picked up the stone and ran to his brother and said, "Really? Then my younger brother." As Han Yu-jin exclaimed this hopeful statement, he heard a disappointing answer, "Except for the resurrection of the dead." When he heard that even this stone was not omnipotent and could not do everything its owner wanted, he said in disappointment, "You're crazy. What is this any wish then? What shall I wish for? Thinking about the alternatives, Han Yu-jin's thoughts were divided. If I can make a wish for anything, then maybe I can become stronger than Yu Hyun, become the strongest hunter, a new hero. This time I can get the role I've been envying so much." Thinking about what his future would be like if he made a wish, and remembering the city now, with Han Yu-hyun everywhere, Jin thought, "No, I can become even more famous." But suddenly, his train of thought changed, and he spoke with a confident voice to the stone that could grant any wish. "Turn back the clock. Turn back to the time when my younger brother had not yet died." Holding the wishing stone in his hands and watching it glow brightly, Han Yu-jin said confidently, "I will not enter the dungeon anymore. I will just live quietly and peacefully. Take me back to the time before I came here. No, to the time before my awakening." Holding the wishing stone in his hands and telling it what he wanted it to do, Han Yu-jin added in the end, "Grant my wish, even if I regret it later." Hearing the request of its master, who had received the wishing stone, the system spoke to Han Yu-jin. "Are you turning back time? To which he replied with a firm, unquestioning voice, "Yes." As soon as he said his wish and confirmed his words, the stone immediately glowed brightly, and a lot of smoke began to come out of it. Preparing for what would happen next, after Han Yujin would go back a few years to relive his entire history, he said, "I will not allow this to happen again." After saying this, and closing his eyes, he felt that he was in a kind of flood that was carrying him in an unknown direction. Being inside it, the boy exclaimed in surprise, "Oh." But the next moment, he was already on the couch with his legs back on, looking around, trying to figure out what time he had gotten to and where he was now. When he realized where he was, Han Yujin said in surprise, "This?" The next moment after the time travel was completed, he realized that he was in the Abyssal Guild. He was the only one there, and he was there because he had just found a dealer for awakening. Han Yujin began to examine his body, trying to figure out if it was real, and as he felt his body, he said in surprise, "Have I really gone back in time?" And the status window doesn't appear either. Taking his cell phone out of his pocket, Han Yujin looked at the date to see if it had really worked, and when he saw the date from 5 years ago, he said, "Oh, indeed, 5 years ago. But why am I here?" Looking at the date on the phone, Han Yujin realized why he was here on this day and why he was here now, and said, "Ah, the day I found the wake-up call broker." Han Yujin recalled what had happened that day. "I left, not knowing it was a scam, and took the money with me, and then they grabbed me and brought me here. I thought I could catch up with my younger brother if I just woke up." After recalling what exactly happened 5 years ago, Han Yujin continued to think about what was going to happen next, and what would follow. And then he said anxiously, "Wait a second, so..." Hearing the sound of someone's feet, Han Yujin immediately got up from the couch, but he was about to hide, remembering what was coming next, and said anxiously, "This room is coming soon." No sooner had he said this than the door to the room opened, and Han Yujin heard Han Yujin say, "Brother, I told you so." When Han Yuhyun entered his older brother's room, he spoke to him in an irritated tone. "How many times do I have to tell you? Don't ever let yourself come here." Hearing the footsteps and seeing his younger brother enter the room, Han Yujin immediately got up from his seat and ran to meet him, and immediately exclaimed, "He's back." When Han Yujin saw that his brother had indeed entered the room and was alive and well, he was overcome with emotion and threw his arms around him, thinking happily, "He really came back." Noticing his older brother's strange reaction, the younger one exclaimed in confusion, "Brother?" And the latter, barely holding back his tears, said, "What a relief. He's alive. Yu Hyun is alive," as he continued to hug his younger brother, realizing that everything he had done and how he had treated Han Yujin was not for nothing, but for his own good. He said guiltily, "I'm sorry." When the younger man also hugged him, recovering from his shock, he heard the older man say, "I am to blame. I behaved so recklessly. For both. I'm sorry for everything." Hearing these words from his older brother, the younger one said in surprise, "What? Brother? Did you really get into even more trouble?" To which he quickly replied, "No, nothing like that." While embracing his younger brother, the elder suddenly began to speak words that were unusual for him at that time and said, "I just thought about it while walking here. You are 25. No, I'm 20 now." Recalling how his brother used to suffer because of his actions and sit sadly in his office, Han Yujin said, "All this time, you've been alone in the guild and in the dungeon. You've suffered so much. The person who calls himself your old brother should have realized earlier." Turning away from his younger brother, the older man, having finished apologizing, said, "Forgive me. I will not make a fuss anymore. I won't give you any more headaches, huh?" Hearing his elder brother say such strange words that he hadn't expected to hear, Han Yuhyun was shocked to hear him say, "Brother." He hugged his elder brother, who apologized for his behavior and promised not to cause any more trouble, and said to him, "Yes, thank you for saying that." After confiding in his younger brother about all that he had done, and about his premature conclusions that he had previously made, Han Yujin thought, "What a relief. I feel a little ashamed." Thinking back to when they were young and were best friends, Han Yujin thought, "Thank goodness that at least now we can go back to the way things were." As he thought about it, he also remembered how happy they had been then, even though they had no other friends besides their brother, and they could only rely on each other. Han Yujin put his hand on his younger brother's shoulder and spoke to him in a brotherly tone. "My little brother, Han Yu-hyun, I love you." After saying this, Han Yujin thought, "Yes, from now on, I will definitely not even think about the awakening and the hunters anymore. I'll just sit back and relax." And then a notification sounded. The recording of the awakened Han Yujin is complete. The legendary title was received, Dragon Slayer, Perfect Tutor. The additional skill, My Baby is the Best, is launched. Han Yu-hyun's pet's growth rate has been doubled. After this touching reunion, the two brothers returned home, and Han Yu-hyun stood at the stove to prepare dinner and said, "Everything will be ready soon, so just sit still." Hearing this, Han Yujin replied, "Oh, yeah, okay." Hearing this from his brother, and answering him without even trying to argue, Han Yu-jin, realizing what was going on here, suddenly felt very uncomfortable in this situation. Recalling what had happened between them on that particular day, Han Yu-jin said guiltily, "Before I went back in time on that day, we had another fight and I ran away from home. Despite what happened this morning, things are surprisingly calm now, and even very good. They are both in the same house, and while one was cooking, the other was waiting peacefully. Sitting at the table, waiting for them to eat dinner, Han Yu-jin watched his brother cooking and thought, it's good that we made up, but I didn't expect us to have dinner together. But what was most important was that Han Yu-jin had awakened his power, and he had a window of state that he could call upon again. Looking at his talents, Han Yu-jin thought again, I never thought that I would awaken again like this, and even earlier than before. What kind of rank is this? Clicking on the icon, an inscription appeared at the bottom that read, Dragon Slayer L proof of killing a first-class dragon species alone. Seeing this achievement, Han Yu-jin said to himself in surprise, I got this for killing Rauchitas? Didn't the time travel make it go back as if it hadn't happened? Is that normal? This is so strange. Clicking on the Dragon Slayer achievement icon again, Han Yu-jin said in surprise, and L class means legendary class, right? Above S class. After clicking on the achievement icon, Han Yu-jin saw that 4 skills appeared, all of which were interconnected, and said, 4 skills from this one rank. Looking at all the abilities, he saw resist L-class poisons and resist L-class curses. Looking at these skills alone, Han Yu-jin said, L-class resistance. This is the first time I've ever seen something like this. So I've become more resistant to any poison, curse, and intimidation below legendary grade. Continuing to look at his skills, Han Yu-jin saw L-class intimidation resistance and Rashitas predator, SS. After looking at all the skills, Han Yu-jin added, and I can also use double the sweat power of a dragon species similar to Rashitas. Seeing such amazing skills in his inventory, Han Yu-jin immediately stood up and exclaimed with joy, believing in his abilities. Am I really... Looking at his talents, which he had been given together with the title of Dragon Slayer, he thought happily, I've become the strongest in the world after rolling back?